The snow came down like a punishment from God. Thick, relentless. The flakes were the size of silver dollars, swirling so fast that they erased the trees from sight. You couldn't tell where the trail ended and the abyss began. A boy named Elijah clung to the side of his wagon, crying not from fear, but because the tears helped warm his face. Beside him, his sister Miriam stood barefoot in the snow. She'd outgrown her shoes weeks earlier, and the family had nothing left to trade. Their mother knelt by the fire pit, coaxing a flame from damp twigs. The firewood was gone. They'd burned the tool handles, furniture legs, even the spare ox yoke. Now it was branches from a frozen sapling, green, wet, and barely burning. And their father? He was dead. Buried beneath a drift they marked with a single pine branch. He'd gone out to search for the trail again, swearing he could find it this time. He never came back. This was the end of the shortcut. This was the cost of trust. It was the fall of 1853 when the combined Utter Hughes wagon train split off from the main Oregon Trail near Fort Boise. They were bound for the Willamette Valley, dreaming of farmland and freedom. The families, roughly 50 people in total, were made up of farmers, carpenters, and homesteaders. Among them were John and Margaret Utter with their 6 children, the Hughes brothers and their families, and a smattering of single men who'd attached themselves to the group for safety. They had more than a dozen wagons, nearly 200 cattle, and a half-dozen ox teams. The Notches Pass Trail had been heavily promoted that year by a group of Army surveyors and traders. Difficult but quicker, they claimed. Cut days off your journey. The federal government had even funded road clearing efforts to make the pass viable. What no one mentioned was that those crews had abandoned their work weeks earlier, unpaid, undermanned, and outmatched by the terrain. By late October, the wagons reached the eastern slope of the Cascades. It was later in the season than any train should have attempted the crossing, but the families were desperate. Snow hadn't yet fallen, and the skies remained clear. A warm wind swept through the valleys, giving the illusion of safety. But the forest ahead was dense, trees packed so tightly the wagons couldn't pass. Men took axes and saws, chopping hour after hour just to gain 100 feet. The trail became a choke point. Wagons had to go through one at a time, which meant long waits and no progress. Then it rained, and rained, days of it. The forest floor turned to soup. Wagons sank to their axles. Oxen slipped and collapsed. The children grew pale and weak from damp clothing and poor food. Still, they pressed on. They had to. By early November, they were halfway through the pass. That's when the snow came. At first, it dusted the trail, nothing the pioneers hadn't seen before. But overnight, it dumped a foot. Then another the next night. The forest turned white. The trail vanished. With no road crews and no visible markers, the lead scouts lost the route. They took wrong turns, found dead ends, backtracked. Each detour burned calories and morale. One morning, a wagon slipped on an icy grade and tipped. A little girl was crushed underneath. Her name was Sarah Jameson. She was 7 years old. The group held a short service and buried her beneath the snow. Her mother didn't speak again for 2 days. The cattle began to die, first from exhaustion, then starvation. The men carved what meat they could and hung it from trees. But the wind took most of the smell away, and even the wolves didn't come. They were alone. On November 15th, the decision was made to send a scouting party ahead to Fort Steilacoom, west of the mountains. The group consisted of 4 men: Daniel Splawn, Edward Meeks, Levi Utter, and Samuel Hartwell. They took snowshoes, rifles, and a few pounds of flour wrapped in oilcloth. They promised to return with help. They never did. Whether they died in the snow or made it through and were unable to return remains unknown. No confirmed trace of them was ever found. Their departure left the wagon train leaderless, starving, and surrounded by silence. One by one, families abandoned their wagons. With no animals left to pull them and no firewood to spare, the wagons were torn apart for kindling. They built makeshift shelters using brush and wagon canvas, digging snow caves into hillsides to trap body heat. Food was gone. They boiled leather. They scraped bark. They ate mice. Then came the first reports of snow blindness. The glare off the drifts was so intense that it burned the retinas. Children screamed and clawed at their faces. Mothers used torn skirts to fashion makeshift eye patches. A woman named Clara Hughes gave birth in the snow. There was no midwife left. The baby, a boy, was stillborn. They wrapped him in rags and buried him beside his grandfather, under a twisted fir tree. Clara stopped eating after that. She died 4 days later. One man went mad. He was found babbling about sunlight and orchards, stuffing his mouth with pine needles. Another father took his last piece of jerky and fed it to his children, then walked into the woods without a coat. He never came back. The journal of 12-year-old Martha Utter survives today. Found decades later in the ruins of a cabin near Greenwater River, her writings tell of a girl trying to stay brave. "We pray to God each night," she wrote, "but he is busy, I think. Maybe with the others." It wasn't until December 9th that help finally arrived. A trapper named Tom Quick found a trail of wagon ruts beneath the snow and followed it. He came across 2 children huddled beneath a broken wagon bed. They were half frozen, unable to speak. He carried them down the slope and alerted the nearest settlement. A rescue party of loggers, soldiers, and missionaries set out immediately. They reached the survivors on December 14th. Out of the original 50, only 19 remained alive. Most were children. They were wrapped in buffalo robes, fed broth, and carried out by sled. One girl died just before sunrise on the final day. She was buried beside the trail. No one knew her last name. The survivors were brought to Fort Steilacoom and sheltered by settlers. Many never fully recovered. Some developed lifelong respiratory issues. Others refused to ever speak of the journey again. The tragedy made it into a few newspapers, but without much fanfare. 1853 was a year of expansion. Disasters like this were seen as unfortunate, but expected. The wilderness did not care. Even in the decades that followed, no monument was built, no plaques, no markers, just silence. Today, the old Natchez Pass Trail is overgrown, reclaimed by forest, but every few years hikers stumble on signs of the doomed wagon train, iron hardware rusted into the earth, rotted leather, or initials carved into tree trunks. And sometimes, in the hush of the trees, they say you can hear weeping. Not loud, not close, but distant, as though coming from behind the veil of snow. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.